Christmas Day, 1914, as it dawned for many. There is the title of this drawing by the British soldier artist Bruce Bairnsfather.
There is nothing to report, and Christmas Day passed quietly.
So signals Sir John French, Commander-in-Chief of the British Army on the Western Front, in his daily report to the War Office. But there was something to report. The generals didn't hear about it until afterwards, nor did the newspapers. But a fortnight later, the Daily Graphic got hold of this snapshot taken by a soldier in no man's land. To people at home reading papers full of the blood and bile of wartime, it was hard to believe. Glad tidings for once from the ghastly fields of Flanders. Today it has an almost legendary ring, but it did take place on parts of the British line. And we record it by visiting some of the places, by photographs taken at the time, and by drawings made in 1914 by French, German and British artists. These old soldiers have just been back tracing the lines of the former trenches. Here at La Boutillerie, not far from Armentières, Colonel Scott Shepherd was then a young subaltern.
From here to here was no man's land, and my battalion, the 2nd Battalion of the Worcester Regiment, took turn with the Royal Scots Fusiliers in manning this ditch over some 6 weeks before Christmas in very wet weather. The ditch naturally filled, and it was difficult to keep a good parapet going in such conditions. But just a day or two before Christmas, the weather completely changed. It was dry and frosty, and it was naturally followed by very misty weather, rather like it is today.
Further north at Frelinga, Colonel Johannes Niemann was a second lieutenant with the 133rd Saxon Regiment.
It was quite still, no shooting, a bit snow. And when we arrived the trenches, we got in our dugout, the company leader, I, myself, the lieutenant, and 2 orderlies. And we placed a little Christmas tree lighted upon the breastwork, and we thought the Tommies had one also.
On Christmas Eve, we relieved the Scots Fusiliers, and we were amazed to find, all the reliefs of course took place at night, and we were amazed to find that the Germans had put little lit candles on Christmas trees all along the line as far as we could see. And the chaps in the trenches along this line roughly, in a very Christmassy mood, just took pot shots at the lights they could see, and there was a real Christmas spirit going on.
Then we sang our old Christmas songs, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, and oh, du fröhliche, oh, your grace bringing Christmas time. The Tommies cheered and sang their songs too. The long way to Tipperary, the long way to go, and home sweet home. And then it was still.
Had begun and the call had gone out. And before we continue the story of the truce, let's turn back to August 1914 and the wave of patriotism swept the first hundreds of thousands of men into the recruiting stations.
Now God be thanked who has matched us with his hour and caught our youth and wakened us from sleeping.
In Germany, too, the march to glory. We can only appreciate what happened at Christmas against the background of the varied moods of wartime. Certainly there was courage, comradeship, good humor, and patriotism. But Kitchener was the object of malice. And his immensely successful drive for 1 million recruits was derided by German newspapers. Kitchener says to Sir John French,
General, I hand over to you our newly formed army. There are only 12 men, don't you know, but it's well known that one Englishman can account for a regiment of bally Germans.
1 million Germans were pouring into France and Belgium, whilst the good old regulars of the British Expeditionary Force, the old Contemptibles, crossed the Channel. As tough and well-trained an army as we have ever sent abroad. The German press ridiculed them, especially the Scots. On our side, French and British cartoonists lampooned the Kaiser, their favourite target, the warlord, the sower of death, the hated head of the German Empire, or, as the London bystander called him, the German vampire. In the fever of war, both sides conscripted God. According to the Liverpool Courier, the Kaiser told the German people,
"On me the Spirit of God has descended. I am his sword, his weapon."
And amid the slaughter, the London Times said,
"Every nation cries to God that they are his chosen people."
Hatred was drummed up on all the home fronts. The German papers and leaders represented the fighting in heroic terms as the only way to check blood-sucking British imperialism enmeshing the entire world. And the only way to cut through the encirclement of the fatherland by France and Britain and Russia. The ruthless onslaught by German armies raised our public anger to white heat, especially when atrocities in Belgium and France were inflated for propaganda. It is impossible now to unravel from the 1914 tangle of falsehood and truth how many of the atrocities were true, how many invented. But when war is declared, truth is the first casualty. Both sides claimed truth as well as God as their ally. The Daily Express of London,
The lie lord of Europe and his champions.
and Kladderadatsch of Berlin.
Truth bound to the mast of John Bull's pirate ship.
The editor of the magazine, John Bull, Horatio Bottomley, went to the limit of hatred.
Germany must be wiped off the face of the earth.
The Allies stopped the Germans' drive towards Paris and the Channel ports. Certainly they sniffed the sea at Ostend, but got little further down the coast. Inland, terrible devastation. And the defence of Ypres, though a supreme feat for the British regular army, brought enormous loss of life. And then came winter, and the war of movement froze into the war of trenches, of barbed wire, of crucifixion in no man's land. In December, the war came right home to England. German battleships bombarded Scarborough, Whitby and Hartlepool. For the first time in 250 years, English blood was spilled on English soil, 149 people killed. The Archbishop of York declared that an experience so strange and terrible would move the British people to press the war with determined resolution. Count Reventlow of the Tageszeitung said,
To fight with success, we fight with ruthlessness.
The British Daily Graphic captioned this,
Made in Germany to murder innocent children.
While the shelling of England inflamed hatred on the home front, on the Western Front all this propaganda meant little to the frontline Tommy. He felt simply that he had a dirty job to do, to scotch forever the German idea that might is right. But as the juggernaut of war literally bogged down, the sheer endurance of the men, British and German, developed in them a respect for the soldier opposite. In this sense, they had more in common with each other than with the folks at home. A common baptism of mud and blood. But of course, Old Bill, as Bruce Bairnsfather called the Tommy, brought to France the saving grace of a sense of humour.
Poor old Maggie. She seems to be having it dreadful wet at home.
There's a little wet home in the trench, where rainstorms continually drench. There's a dead cow close by, with her hooves towards the sky, and she gives off a beautiful stench. Underneath in the place of a floor, there's a mess of wet mud and some straw, and the Jack Johnsons tear through the rain-sodden air in our little wet home in the trench.
But the Tommy's outward good cheer could not disguise his realization that there was to be no swift glory in this war. The Germans also were disenchanted. In this Bavarian regiment was a young officer, Josef Seewald, who had his camera with him in the front line.
We were in the trenches, and we all had thought that war would be over till Christmas. Our Emperor, Wilhelm, had said that we would be at home when the leaves of the trees fall down. But there were no trees with leaves. It was war just as ever.
One German wrote home,
We have gained everything. Our cemeteries now extend as far as the sea.
corpses frozen in mud, the view from Seewald's trench. Then Pope Benedict cut across the obscenities of war with an appeal for a truce on Christmas Day to bring a healing balm to the wounds inflicted. Sir John French, British commander, said later that he'd sympathized with the idea as what he called chivalry in war. While the Pope waited for governments to reply, German and British forces moved forward to battle. Civilians were still living not far behind the trenches, and staying at a farm near the sector known as La Boutillerie was a refugee, Madame Robinson Pearlmel, then a girl of 17, who remembers the soldiers billeted there that December.
We used to see them every 4 days going to the trenches at dusk, and there used to be, we always felt a bit nostalgic about it, to see them going and wondering inwardly how many of them will come back. And they used to go away, singing away, whistling, keep the home fire burning. That was at dusk, you see, in the semi-darkness. And around the 18th of December, they they got ready and started to march to go. We used to always watch them go. And they said, bye-bye, bye-bye, we'll see you in Lille at Christmas.
As Christmas Day approached, the Vatican received the replies of the nations.
Agreement in principle by Britain, Belgium and Germany. Refusal by France on military grounds. By Russia because she does not celebrate Christmas until January.
Goodwill or no, many returned from the fighting on stretchers.
Those poor men were there lying down on the footpath in the darkness and cold, as it was very bitterly cold, like we have sometime every 3-4 years in this part, very bitter, freezing. And so we look at each other and we said, oh, those men are dying, because they used to shout, Mama, 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 and then some other whispering very low because they were very bad. I remember they used to say, abide with me, Mama. So we looked with each other and we rushed in to get some rum. We thought we'll moisten their lips, may give them a bit of comfort.
On Christmas Eve, no star in the east. Only very lights rising over those beyond comfort.
At dawn, on Christmas morning, there was the usual stand to, of course, everybody manning their posts along this line. And as dawn came, the fog was so thick, you couldn't see your hand in front of you, as they always say. And we took the opportunity, all of us, to get out and fill sandbags, knock up the parapet and get everything repaired, and they were all working with their spades like backs, everybody paying attention to improving our defenses and making the thing a little more comfortable, trying to drain off the water. Presently, the fog lifted very quickly. It lifted astoundingly quickly. And along that line, we were able suddenly to see the Germans doing exactly the same thing, all out in the open. And we just looked at each other for some time, and then one or two soldiers went towards them. They came across no man's land, and just about out there where that plough line is, from there to, what would one say, 100 yards from here, they met, they shook hands, they swapped cigarettes, they got talking, and well, the war for that moment came to a standstill.
The next morning it was a bit foggy, firstly, and when we are taking our coffee and cake and in our dugout, then suddenly Early jumped in and cried, "The Tommies come on, and ours are also going upstairs." We met the Tommies there and began to shake hands and slap each other on the shoulder, inspect badges and so on. We spoke about the things a soldier has on his mind, about the families and naturally about the mademoiselles in Armandière and Lille. Then we exchanged presents, cigarettes, tobacco, cigars, cognac, whiskey and so on.
Several of them spoke English. They were Saxons. They rather expressed their dislike for the Prussians and their dislike for the whole war, in fact. They weren't aggressive at all. Some of them said they had been to London, been to England, and in fact they gave every indication of being glad to meet us.
Suddenly a Tommy came with a football, kicking already and make fun. And then began a football match. We marked our goals with our caps. Tommies did also. And we had much kicking, and then, after all, the Germans won the football game with 3-2.
I think it was very moving because one had been looking at that part of the country as something dangerous to tread into unless it was quite dark. One got very cramped by keeping in cover all the time. But when to be able to walk about in it in daylight was quite a sensation, having treated it as something that you didn't tread on in daylight without expecting to get killed.
I was astonished, all of a sudden no more fighting and no order to do anything, so we could do all that we wanted to do. How I felt it was impossible to say in words. We didn't think about our high command behind the lines. I must say we didn't think at all. It just happened.
John Wilkins was then a stretcher bearer with the Wiltshires.
Well, it was a very funny feeling. It didn't seem right. When all you saw in the daylight was just a flat field, and then to come out and walk, it seemed so unreal to be able to walk in the middle of no man's land and not be shot at.
There was everywhere much fun. But the greatest fun, that was for our soldiers, the Scotch kilt. We had never seen soldiers with skirts. That was a great astonishment for us. And then the greatest was when the Scotch soldiers turned his round and lifted her back. And then we saw she had nothing underneath. That was the stuff to give the troops.
They talked about the reason for the war, and they didn't want the war, and they didn't want the fight, and generalities like that. Nothing really. There was no ill feeling, no bad feeling. Everybody was friendly. The only thing is, we didn't go near their trenches, and we wouldn't allow them to come near ours.
As the day wore on, there were some corpses about from the little battle we had down there on the right on December the 18th, and every effort was made to give these a decent burial.
The Germans brought all the Worcesters that had been killed on the 18th of December over from their trenches over towards the centre. And they handed them over to us. We took them back behind the trenches and buried them.
The lieutenant said there was a comrade who had been killed, and they wished to bury this man here. And I said, why not? Of course you can do it. And so they brought the dead man, laid him in the ground, and we all laid a handful of earth upon the dead man and together prayed the Lord's Prayer. Vater unser, der du bist in dem Himmel. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
This unofficial and strange, quite weird truce went on for at least a week. But as time wore on, the more senior people way back, brigade, divisional and corps headquarters all gradually learned what was happening, and it was finally arranged that on New Year's Eve at 12 o'clock, everybody would be back in their places and the war would continue. I think the reason for this truce was entirely and only because it was Christmas and there was Christmas spirit in the air. It was the feeling that, like we have now, like we have for hundreds of years felt at Christmas time, everybody's friendly.
When we heard the Englishmen, we began to sing also louder and louder, and all at once it was like a hymn that arose out of the trenches to the sky. Christmas was a thing that united the enemies, and it is wonderful to think that the thought of Bethlehem would unite the men. The men heard the voice of 2,000 years back, but the rulers did not hear. And so war went on for 4 years, and millions of young men had to die.
God rest you merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay, for Jesus Christ our Saviour was born on Christmas Day to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy.